Hello, Reformed mythologist Morgan Locke here with a video about the remarkable life of Ibelin. This Netflix documentary is about Norwegian World of Warcraft player Mats Steen and tells the story of him growing up in a loving family and finding friendship through online gaming. Mats was living a double life. Though he was limited in his physical movements by muscular dystrophy, he explored the planet of Azeroth, worked as a private detective, and made many great friends in the Starlight Guild. Let me say from the outset that this documentary might be the most effective piece of media for gamers to show their non-gaming family and friends why they love it so much. Okay, from my point of view, this documentary is fascinating for 4 reasons. Number 1, play matters. Now, this first aspect is going to seem like Captain Obvious, but exploring the stories we take for granted is kind of the shtick on this channel. We focus on the theology of storytelling, so a massively multiplayer online role-play game such as World of Warcraft is very interesting to me. The first thing I want to talk about is the joy of the imaginary play world, the World of Warcraft. It will sound obvious to any gamers, but why would someone spend between 15 and 20,000 hours in the last 10 years of their life playing a video game? And why is this concept so radically difficult to wrap your head around if you're observing it from the outside? This was perhaps what was so dramatic for Matt's family in the first few days after his death. They had seen him every day, but they appeared to have no idea of what was happening in the game. They were outside the play world, so it had no meaning or value for them. This was similarly the case for Lizetta, aka Rumour, the lady who had her computer privileges taken away by her parents. There's something about play, something about the power of the imagination, which proves deeply addictive. But it's almost impossible to discover while you remain outside. In one sense, this is bigger than the particular story of the documentary itself. There is a real and ordinary world, the what is, and the game provides players with a what if, the world, the play world of Warcraft. And this what if provides opportunities to explore beyond the bounds of physical disability, which leads us to the next point. Number 2, imaginary worlds can solve real-world problems. The second interesting point was the curative relationship between the physical world of Mats and the virtual/story world of Ibelin. As an individual, Mats struggled with a deeply debilitating condition, but he had a strong and loving family. The documentary shows how deeply they loved him, cared for him, and provided for him. The film shows that Mats' difficulty was essentially physical rather than relational. The game provided a place for him to be free from his physical restrictions. But for other members of the Starlight Guild, those with seemingly more complicated family relationships, World of Warcraft provided something else. And so while Mats went into Azeroth initially to run and play, their adventures provided them with the opportunity for healthier relationships. And since Matt's disability was not visible to his fellow players, he was able to engage in friendship without his disability dominating the conversation. It wasn't a barrier to being treated like a fellow human being. The documentary points to the fact that through play, once Mats was liberated from engaging with people based upon his condition, he had the freedom to attend to the concerns of others. And one particular example of this in the film was how Mats helped to strengthen the relationship between Xenia and her son. Mats appeals to the opportunities of the play world to allow for emotional connection. Mother and son hug for the first time in years in the game before that hug happens in the real world. The play world helped to solve real-world problems. Number 3, transposing media. The third aspect I want to mention is the shifting of media. The logs of Matt's activity in the game, the description of the scenes, the storylines and the dialogue that he was part of provided the script for an animation. And this is perhaps what lifts this documentary above other similar films. This elevation allows us the opportunity to be immersed in the story that Mats and his friends were telling. We are invited into their play world. We often say on this channel that media consumption is optional. Now, a lot of the people who seem to thrive in the imaginary worlds of roleplay are those who have found difficulty in relating to others in the real world. They can feel that the real world is not designed for them to succeed, that schooling and society feels stacked against them. They can feel like the gaming world or the play world is a refuge from the challenges of real life. But I wonder whether the tension between gamers and non-gamers is also that gamers can sometimes fail to recognize that gaming itself can be intimidating for the uninitiated. There is a lot to wrap your head around. It can feel like a foreign language. But this documentary, by animating those aspects of the story which were lived out by the players, provides the rest of us with an easier access point. The Remarkable Life of Ibelin is the film gamers should show to non-gamers if they want to persuade them that playing games doesn't have to be a distraction or a waste of time. The final point I want to make is this. The imagination points up, not down. On Matt's blog, Musings About Life, he once wrote of his gaming, "It's not a screen. It's a gateway to where your heart desires." I think he's onto something here. The imaginary world of Azeroth is a picture of something greater. The human heart is frustrated in this physical world. The human body is limited by weakness and disease and ultimately death. It is no surprise whatsoever, therefore, that we should want a gateway out of this world to find the desires of our hearts. But these imaginary worlds are similarly incapable of truly satisfying us. As C.S. Lewis once said, "If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." And this applies to us whether we are gamers or not, whether we feel successful in the real world or not, whether we suffer from degenerative conditions or not. This is about our humanity, not our place in a social hierarchy. The one thing I found to be a little depressing about this documentary, which I otherwise thought was great, was the final scene. It ends with Mats' gravestone and the inscription that he was both Mats in the real world and also Ibelin in the World of Warcraft. But the real physical world we live in and the imaginary world in which we play points to another one. Those who contributed to the documentary are very clear that there are two levels of reality, the real physical world and the digital virtual play world. And the virtual world, as I've said, provides an opportunity to resolve real world problems. It allows a mother and son to be reconciled. It allows lonely people to find friends. It allows a man whose muscles have deteriorated to run freely through the countryside. But the real world problem of death cannot be resolved within the imaginary world. From my basic understanding of World of Warcraft, I've picked up that it allows people to live in a pre-modern fantasy land filled with magic and lore. Now, if anyone can be considered the father of such storytelling, it must be J.R.R. Tolkien. Here's what he said about these different worlds, the primary world of creation and the secondary world of our sub-creations, and the fairy story which points to our deepest needs and desires. This story has entered history and the primary world. The desire and aspiration of sub-creation has been raised to the fulfillment of creation. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. In the face of disease and death, there is a gateway to the world of our desires. But it's not mediated through a screen. It's even better than that. Please remember that media consumption is optional. You are under no obligation to watch The Remarkable Life of Ibelin or play World of Warcraft. I've been Reformed mythologist Morgan Locke. I'm glad you were here.